Long before the galaxy knew them as enemies, Revan and Malak stood side by side. They fought the same wars, followed the same path, and believed in the same cause. But they understood power very differently. Revan led through quiet authority, through thought, restraint, and purpose. Malak led through force, conviction, and the belief that strength should be seen and felt. They marched together for a time, but they were never truly the same. And when the galaxy finally split beneath them, it was not betrayal that divided them. In Star Wars: The Knights of the Old Republic and its expanded lore, the duel between Revan and Malak is intentionally left extremely vague. There is no detailed blow-by-blow account, no cinematic description of every strike. That absence is a deliberate choice, and it tells us something important. What we do know is this: Darth Revan defeated Malak, and he defeated him decisively. Malak was not killed. He was not even critically wounded, except for one devastating injury: the loss of his jaw. That detail alone tells us almost everything we need to know. If this had been a desperate, evenly matched duel, Malak would have suffered numerous wounds. Instead though, the damage was precise, targeted, and ultimately symbolic. It suggested a fight that ended not in chaos, but in complete domination. Revan did not overwhelm Malak through sheer power. He dismantled him. Before the duel ever began, the outcome was already being shaped, not by skill, but by two completely different ways of understanding power. Revan and Malak didn't just fight each other. They grew apart over years of war, differences in philosophy, and ultimately both of their ambition. One believed power was something to be mastered and directed. The other believed it was something to be unleashed without restraint. Both thought they understood the dark side better than anyone, and both believed the other was wrong. By the time they finally stood face to face, it wasn't just a battle. It was a collision of two different worldviews of the dark side. A test of whether dominance came from control or from utter chaos, from patience or from fury. And Malak was absolutely convinced that he would win, because he believed that Revan had gone soft, because he believed restraint was weakness, because Malak believed the dark side rewarded those willing to embrace it fully. But what he did not understand, and what the story reveals, the duel was never about strength at all. It was about who truly understood power. Before the war ever began, before the Sith and the fall and the betrayal, Revan and Malak were already different, but actually for the same reason. They were rare Jedi unafraid to question the Order. Both saw flaws in the Council's inaction as the Mandalorian threat grew. Both believed the galaxy was paying the price for the Council's hesitation, but they questioned the Order in different ways. Revan challenged the Council with thought, with reason, with strategy. He questioned their refusal to act, their fear of commitment, their obsession with balance at the cost of lives. He argued that leadership meant responsibility, that waiting while the galaxy burned was its own form of failure. Malak, though, challenged them with outright confrontation. He spoke loudly, forcefully, and without patience. Where Revan debated, Malak demanded. Where Revan tried to persuade, Malak accused. He wasn't interested in restraint or deliberation. He wanted action, and he wanted it now. That shared frustration drew them together. They were two Jedi who saw the same problem but believed in radically different solutions. Revan believed the Order needed to be guided. Malak believed it needed to be overthrown and remade. And yet in those early days, that difference didn't divide them, it unified them. Because while Revan questioned the Council with reason, Malak challenged it with fire, and together they became something more dangerous than either of them alone. It was this combination, Revan's vision and Malak's fury, that would eventually drag the Jedi Order into a war that it was not prepared to win or fight. And it was this same difference, born in the early debates, that would one day tear both of them apart in a duel. As the Mandalorian War raged on, the divide between Revan and Malak deepened. Victory after victory hardened them both, but in different ways. Revan remained calculated, always weighing the cost of each and every move, choosing when and where to strike with precision. He fought wars like puzzles to be solved, not battles to be indulged in. Malak, on the other hand, grew increasingly impatient. Each battle fed his hunger for dominance. Where Revan saw strategy, Malak saw restraint. Where Revan held back, Malak saw only weakness. The more the war escalated, the more Malak began to believe that mercy, caution, and restraint were flaws, obstacles standing between him and his victory. And by the time the Mandalorian War was won, and they reached the edges of known space, the rift between them widened into something irreparable. Then came their encounter with the Sith Emperor of Dromund Kaas. The two young Jedi were twisted, corrupted, and ultimately broken, but in different ways again. Revan bent without surrendering. He learned, he adapted, and he endured. but Malak surrendered completely. Where Revan absorbed the dark side as knowledge, Malak embraced it as a new identity. He was no longer Alec the Jedi, but now Darth Malak. Revan would come to learn as the dark side as a tool, something that needed to be controlled, but Malak would worship it, believing that dominance was proof of righteousness to the dark side and to the Sith way. What had once been a partnership became an inevitability. Two men shaped by the same fire, but burning in opposite directions. As a new war began, the Jedi Civil War, Malak's frustration only deepened. He watched Revan lead campaign after campaign with restraint, sparing worlds, preserving governments, and leaving all infrastructure that he could intact. Revan's conquest was about control. Order could not be imposed without annihilation. A conquered system that still functioned could be ruled, taxed, and bent to a greater design. But Malak did not see it that way. Restraint was unforgivable. He had embraced the dark side fully in his eyes, and it demanded total commitment. Power was not something to be moderated or rationed. It was something to be exercised absolutely. The Republic, in his mind, deserved to be broken, not managed. Fear, not stability, was the true foundation of Sith rule. As the war continued, Malak began to see Revan not as a revolutionary or a visionary, but as an obstacle. To Malak, Revan was still thinking like a Jedi, restraining himself, refusing to embrace the power that he could wield. And that belief hardened into a deep resentment. And by the time they broke from Vitiate's control, resentment had turned into certainty. Malak no longer believed Revan was the rightful master. He believed Revan was not only holding him back, but the galaxy, and that someone more ruthless and more committed needed to take his place. Two Sith Lords forged by the same two wars, standing at opposite ends of what power represented. One seeking control through understanding, the other through pure domination. And only one of them would walk away believing that they had claimed the dark side, and proof that they were master. What makes the duel between Revan and Malak so remarkable is not what we see though, but it's what we don't see. There is no record of a prolonged clash, no exchange of wounds, no moment where Revan is driven back or pushed to the brink of his skill. For all of the destruction that followed, the duel itself appears almost restrained, and that is precisely the point. Malak was a brutal practitioner of Form 5 lightsaber combat, aggressive and relentless. In open battle, few could ever match him. He fought to overwhelm and to crush. Against most enemies, this approach was devastating, but Revan was not most enemies. When they finally crossed blades, Revan did not meet force with force. He did not try to overpower Malak, but instead he contained. He dictated pace, positioning, and momentum, and where Malak struck to break, Revan maneuvered to control. It wasn't a battle of endurance, this was a demonstration, and when it ended decisively. Revan stood uninjured, and Malak did not. Revan walked away without a single scratch, but Malak was left permanently maimed. This was not a duel fought to the brink. This was a lesson delivered with precision. Just like with the systems, Revan did not act in anger, he acted with calculation. The removal of Malak's jaw was not an act of cruelty, but a final, undeniable statement of his utter control and mastery. Revan did not need to kill him to prove he was superior. He needed only to take away the very thing that Malak had and what he relied on, his voice. He finally understood that strength was not about fury or brutality, but about mastery. Mastery of one's opponent and mastery of oneself. It is this understanding that separated Revan from Malak. And this is where the interpretation matters. When you step back from the myth and look at the story as a whole, it is clear that this duel was never meant to be a clash of equals. It was the culmination of a long imbalance that had been building for years. Revan didn't react to Malak's challenge. He anticipated that it would happen. By the time they dueled, Revan had already studied how Malak fought, how he thought, and how he relied on aggression. He understood Malak's strengths, but more importantly, he understood his limitations. The duel was not spontaneous. It is the final step in a process that Revan had been preparing for a long time before their blades were ever drawn. This is why the outcome feels one-sided. Revan wasn't discovering Malak's weaknesses in the moment. He was exploiting weaknesses that he already knew were there. Malak believed he was proving himself. Revan was confirming what he had already identified. And that's what separates them. Malak believed that power was something you seized in the moment. Revan understood that power is something you prepare for long before the moment ever arrives. In this sense, this duel is not a test of strength. It is merely the final demonstration of how far ahead Revan had already moved. The dark side is not a single philosophy. It has always rewarded power in many forms, and across its long history, different Sith have embodied different expressions of that power. There are those like Malak and Darth Malgus, conquerors shaped by war. They are the enforcers of the dark side. Their strength is visible, immediate, and overwhelming. Their power is meant to be felt. And then there are those figures like Revan, Vitiate, Marka Ragnos, and Sidious, those who represent something colder, more patient, and more dangerous. They are not conquerors in the traditional sense. They are architects. Where Malak and Malgus break worlds, Sith like Revan reshape them. They don't simply defeat their foe, they outthink them. They do not need constant displays of strength because their power lies in their preparation. Empires fall not through conquest, but through design. This is the divide that defined Revan and Malak. Malak believed that the dark side was violent, relentless, without restraint. To him, power was proven through domination and through the destruction of one's enemies. Malak was formidable, but ultimately predictable. Revan understood that great power is not how hard one struck, but how they could shape the battlefield before the blow was ever required. And yet, to be completely fair, Darth Malak did learn. In the aftermath of the defeat, he was not the same Sith who had challenged Revan in arrogance. He studied, and he began to understand the kind of power that Revan had. It was Darth Malak, after all, who would later strike at the precise moment that Revan was most vulnerable, turning the tide through patience and timing rather than raw strength. In that moment, he believed that he had finally surpassed his master. But even then, the lesson was incomplete. Malak learned how to imitate Revan's methods, but he never truly understood them. He adopted strategy, but not restraint. He embraced ambition, but not discipline and calculation. His hunger for dominance still outweighed his ability to control it. And so while Malak grew into a far more dangerous Sith after the duel, more commanding and more destructive, he never escaped the shadow of the lesson that Revan tried to teach him. Revan had shown him that power was not measured by fury, but by mastery, and mastery alone. And though Malak would spend the rest of his life trying to prove that he had surpassed his master, the truth remained unchanged. Revan did not just defeat Malak, he defined him. Before I wrap this up, I want to be clear. What I'm about to say is my interpretation of the events. It's not something that's explicitly stated in the lore, but I believe Revan anticipated the confrontation with Malak long before it ever happened. Not in the sense that he knew the exact moment or the outcome, but in the sense that he understood where Malak was headed. Revan knew his apprentice's temperament, he knew his hunger for dominance, and I believe that he prepared for the possibility that one day, Malak would turn on him. That preparation, in my view, explains why the duel unfolded the way that it did. Revan wasn't reacting. He was executing a plan that he already had. He understood Malak, his aggression, and his reliance on power, and he prepared accordingly. The outcome was not luck, it wasn't chance, it was the result of Revan's foresight. This doesn't mean that Malak is weak, quite the opposite. It means that Revan considered him dangerous enough to plan long before the blades ever crossed. And that's where I'll leave it. Malak was powerful and extremely capable, but he was never the master that he believed himself to be. Malak mistook rage for depth and domination for understanding of the dark side, and in the end, it would cost him this duel and his voice. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to explore more of the darker corners of Star Wars lore, the minds behind power, not just power itself, I would love for you to stick around. There is much more to uncover, and plenty more stories worth digging into. Thanks for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.